Good evening, everyone. Hello. Welcome. Oops. My name is Abby Limbersky. I'm the Director of Programs here at City of Asylum, and it is my great honor to welcome those of you who are gathered here, as well as those of you who are tuning in from home for this evening's important program. City of Asylum was founded 16 years ago to provide sanctuary to writers exiled from their home countries under threat of persecution and violence. We've been able to build a safe home, a welcoming home for our writers from all over the world, thanks to the generosity and open hearts of the Pittsburgh community. Over the years, our writers have taught us and our city the power of using one's voice to speak out against forces bent on fear and oppression. They're living with us as neighbors, and their desire and drive to share their work and their stories with all of us has also given rise to City of Asylum's roster of free cultural programs. It's the melding of our writer sanctuary and our public programs that allow this community to come together to celebrate creative free expression and, importantly, to reveal the ability of the arts to bring us closer to one another, to uplift and to create light, and to foster empathy by giving voice to our shared emotions and our common humanity. That function and power of art is what we'll experience tonight, that centers music and poetry and the role of artists to shine a light through darkness, all to honor the victims and survivors of the horror of the Tree of Life shooting. And City of Asylum is really humbled to host and to be gathered with you all. This program is presented in partnership with the Jack Buncher Endowed Chair in Jewish Studies in the Department of History at Carnegie Mellon University. Thank you to them and to the organizers of this program, the Clarion Quartet, and Michal Friedman herself, who is at Carnegie Mellon University, who you'll hear from in just a moment. And thank you to tonight's co-sponsors, the Dietrich College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Carnegie Mellon, the School of Music at Carnegie Mellon, the 1027 Healing Partnership, and Classrooms Without Borders. To orient you just a bit to the flow of the evening, first up we'll hear remarks from Michal Friedman, and then remarks from Rabbi Perlman and Dan Ledger, followed by the Clarion Quartet for a short musical program. And then woven throughout, we'll hear poetry from Western Pennsylvania and from Israel, and we'll close the evening with remarks from Rabbi Myers. Please welcome Michal Friedman.
Thank you very much, Abby, and good evening to everyone. It's an honor to be here tonight at City of Asylum, a place of sanctuary for so many writers who have suffered censorship and persecution in their countries of origin, and to have City of Asylum as a partner for such an occasion. Even though we are here tonight to honor the victims and survivors of the massacre of the Tree of Life Synagogue, some of whom you will hear speak tonight, as a scholar of Jewish history, I would be remiss to not note that tonight also marks the 83rd commemoration of what is commonly known as Kristallnacht, a wave of violent anti-Jewish pogroms that broke out across Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia. Over the course of 48 hours, violent mobs, instigated primarily by Nazi Party officials and members of the SA stormtroopers and Hitler Youth, destroyed hundreds of synagogues, plundering thousands of Jewish-owned businesses, schools, and homes, and 91 Jews were murdered in the course of the events. An additional 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Those 48 hours marked a violent shift in the history of the Third Reich and the harm it inflicted on the lives of so many Jews. It is thus fitting that tonight, in this site of sanctuary, we will hear music played by the Clarion Quartet, composed by individuals of Jewish origin who were suppressed by the Nazi regime, as well as music written by an African-American composer marginalized in a different context of state-sanctioned violence and oppression. Our hope for tonight is that by reaching back into the past, by giving voice to those mostly forgotten composers, some who fled and went into exile and composed new music in their adopted homes, and by listening to reflective poetry, we might illuminate a path forward in the process of the healing of our community, and particularly for those directly affected by the events of 2018. May the balm of music and poetry tonight drown out, even if temporarily, the ongoing voices of hatred and incitement that led to the murder of 11 Jewish individuals in Pittsburgh, and allow us to reflect and find the courage and vigor to forge new enlightening paths. Now I'd like to invite to the stage Rabbi Jonathan Perlman, Rabbi of the New Light Congregation, and a survivor of the attacks, as well as Dan Legger of Dor Hadash Congregation, also a survivor of the attacks. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Friedman, for that kind introduction. I am the rabbi at New Light Congregation here in Pittsburgh, one of the oldest synagogues in the city. And Professor Friedman asked me to share some good news with you about how we've been faring as a synagogue since the attack of October 27th, 2018. And since I have a short time to talk, I wanted to just tell you that before the attack in our synagogue service, we had a handful of men who could lead the service and chant the ancient melodies in Hebrew. And one skill that was very difficult to master is the skill of reading from the Sefer Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and also from the books of the prophets, which we call in Hebrew the Haftorot. And these books of prophets, that we read sections from them every single week, and most of them have very comforting messages about the Jewish people returning to their home, the Jewish people being cared by God, ideas about the ingathering of all the peoples of the world, and of course, messages of peace to the whole world. And every week, the Haftorah, this prophetic reading from Scripture, is read. And in the old days, it was read by just 2 individuals, and Dan Stein and Rich Gottfried, who are no longer with us because they were taken from us in the attack in our synagogue. Following the attack, there was a fervor of response from people in the congregation, many of them who barely knew Hebrew, or knew how to read Hebrew, who wanted to learn this ancient skill of cantillation, of how one could chant scriptural passages from the Bible connected to the prophets. And I'm glad to say that 3 years later, we have 15 people in our small congregation that have mastered the art of cantillation. What is cantillation? Cantillation is kind of the music of the text. We Jews always love to apply music to any text that we read, to beautify it, to extol the text from the Bible. And these notes and these melodies go back to ancient times, where certain figures were inserted into the words of the text to illustrate and to show how they would be chanted in public. And it's difficult for people to learn. And I can say that many of our members can't not sing a note. They have problems with music. They don't read music. But yet they took to the study of the Haftorot cantillation with a great deal of fervor. I just want to sort of point out to you, the kind of workbook we give them. As you can see, there's no staff, there's no musical notation. It doesn't show you when it's a whole note or a half note or a quarter note or a half step or a whole step. They're much like the Gregorian chants that many of you have heard, because they were developed around the same time as Gregorian chants. as the Gregorian chants also were setting scripture to music, so too were Jews setting their scripture to music. And these souls in our congregation have stepped forward to read, and we have multiplied. So I thought that would be a good message for us as we are just about to hear the Clarion Quartet tonight, to bring us comfort. And the way they do music, very, very well. I've heard them before, beautifully. And the way we do music at our synagogue. We are not only bringing these words to life with melodies, but we're also comforting one another, because the messages of the text, as I said before, are one of comfort. Nachamu, nachamu ami. Comfort you, my people. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Perlman. That was really beautiful. And I'd now like to invite Dan Legger of Congregation Dor Hadash.
Good evening, friends. We are told that we must remember them. This seems simple enough, and yet remembering can bring pain as well as pleasure. How do we find the balance we need so that remembering does not overwhelm us, or so that it doesn't deny the complexity of those remembered and the stories and the circumstances that accompany them into the land of memory? One way is through music. We remember our parents through the songs they sang to us at bedtime, the music they chose to expose us to through radio and recordings. The Beatles captured time relationships in singing literally about yesterday. Mendelssohn made songs without words. Olivier Messiaen created an abyss from which a bird sings about injustice and painful loneliness. Bach intertwined melody, harmony, words and sounds in ways that have been reinterpreted by jazz masters as well as scholars. We learn our first prayers in sing-song. We choose ringtones that evoke a person or a special time. Music enhances the power of memory. To listen to the 8th String Quartet of Shostakovich is to walk among unmarked graves and leave heavy monuments in our footprints. To sing around the dinner table is to join our relationships in gratitude. To say Amen to the chanting of El Mali Rachamim or Ravel's rewriting of the Mourner's Kaddish is to remember in a way that makes our memories move rather than stay stuck and still in horror and grief and loss. A musical artist can transform the sounds of broken glass and gunfire into a message that speaks to the heart rather than stops it. We make music to make connections and to make meaning out of life. It's pleasant times, it's times of challenge, and it's times of loss. It's times of joy, and it's times of horror. This universal world of sound vibrates its way into our hearts and heads and creates for us a new and impenetrable place in time. And we are forever grateful to those who create these sounds, those who pass that music down to us, those who interpret it in fresh, new ways for us. The music allows our anger, our joy, our grief, a safe place. It creates an inner chamber in which we can choose to open or close our eyes. It permits our rage. It makes us laugh. It makes us cry. It comforts us. And it helps us remember in ways that transform memory itself. Henry Purcell, in his musical interpretation of Virgil's Aeneid, has Dido sing this lament. Remember me, but not my fate. How can we not remember the fate of my 11 friends? But if we only remember that fate, we fail completely at the task and duty of remembering. It is their beautiful, precious lives that make that fateful loss so painful. It is the 11 wonderful stories of those well-lived lives that is the music we must hear most. It is with deep gratitude that tonight, on this Kristallnacht, we listen to the voices of those who were silenced as well as those who survived, and that we have these 4 generous and wonderfully skilled artists of the Clarion Quartet to offer these gifts to us. May we hear the sweet sounds of the names of our 11 sisters and brothers as we listen to this musical offering. And may their names, Joyce, Richard, Rose, Jerry, Cecil, David, Bernice, Sylvan, Daniel, Melvin, and Irving, ascend with these sounds and silences and return to us again and again in blessed memory. Let us keep their memory alive by listening to one another, bridging our differences with understanding, energizing our service through the music of their names so that ways of peace may, soon and in our time, supplant the bitterness that took them from us.
Thank you very much to Rabbi Perlman and to Dan Legger for their really beautiful comments. And Abby will now come back to the stage to introduce the Clarion Quartet.
The Clarion Quartet is a group of Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra musicians whose mission is to shine a light on music by composers whose works were once banned, suppressed, and silenced. Through a yearning to bring justice to creative voices that have been silenced, the Clarion Quartet is dedicated to providing renewal, hope, and healing through its music and work. Please welcome the Clarion Quartet. Wow, thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce this evening's first poet, Natalie Homer. Natalie is a Southwestern Pennsylvania poet. Her newest collection, entitled Under the Broom Tree, was recently released by Pittsburgh-based publisher Autumn House Press and is for sale in the bookstore this evening. The collection centers poems that explore the wilderness in order to find rest, respite, light in darkness, and divine providence. The collection is inspired by the story of the prophet Elijah, who finds a portent of hope and renewal in the shade of a broom tree. Natalie Homer.
So I'm Natalie. Like Abby said, I'm going to be reading from my poetry collection, Under the Broom Tree, which takes its title from 1 Kings 19. I've always been drawn to that particular passage because of Elijah's suffering and defeat, and how with God's help that's able to be overcome. So the poems I'm going to be reading are just personal lyric poems. They're not all related to that story, but I do hope that they speak in some way to suffering and, more importantly, to hope. Under the Broom Tree, 1 Kings 19, 4-8. Sister, do you remember those cloth dolls, goldenrod and cornflower, yarn hair, happy freckles? The ones we found in the cupboard under the stairs. We were friends then, and I followed you outside, carrying plastic dishes, a wooden high chair, painted storybook bears fading from the backrest. We called the lodgepole pine a broom tree for its brushy branches that we broke off and used to sweep the dirt in our little estate, our playhouse in the Idaho mountains. A smooth stone, baked in the sun, became a golden loaf. We spooned sap as honey, and sagebrush in water made the accompanying soup. We were not weary then, and we knew nothing of Elijah, and little of God for that matter. Our coals and stones, bread and water were our own, and surely no miracle. Wildflowers put on their usual pageant. We pressed Indian paintbrush to our cheeks and lips, believing the petals' pigment would transfer. You have always glowed golden and peach, and I was jealous of you even then, of your long blonde braids and your slender hands. Much had changed by the time, years later, I sat alone in my windowless basement bedroom, the carpet ripped out, the whole house made skeletal and echoing. Outside, the wind sang its strange, sad howl and swept snow across the road in milky tendrils. I prayed for a convenient death, while you were upstairs, laughing your golden bell laugh. I miss you, sister, who you used to be, who I used to be, when we wove ourselves together without thought so few years ago. Dear Astoria, have the skeleton ships succumbed to barnacles and rust, the salt wash of the sea? And the little A-frame named It'll Do, is it still there, safe in the hemlock? Mild-mannered Pacific, I wanted so badly for you to be home. Your palette, cool-toned, foam, moss, grotto, the wood smoke, sweet censer. Easy to perch here at the edge of the world, place of departure. Violet morning, starless dark, where the water seems to make the glass, not just smooth it. 8 rings of the bell mean end of watch. Rarely is suffering heard so clearly. Dormancies. Emptiness, absent for a while, claws out of its hole. Friends die back to the ground as the heat of summer arrives. He was still alive in this book, she said, then heard her own words. The bleeding heart hangs its ornaments, and I solicit the cherry blossoms for a private conversation. In the dream, my teeth casually come loose. I tongue the gaps. The meaning is the one you'd expect. An important question, what bird would you be? I said swan. You said you didn't care for birds. On a dewy summer morning, I walk through a spider web on accident. Like so much else, it clings and follows. This next poem is called Every 7 Years, and the title comes from a student I had when I was teaching English composition, and she wrote her personal narrative essay on her experience being sexually assaulted, which you can imagine was a pretty intense essay. But she had this idea in the essay where she had heard this, or she had found this out somewhere, where every 7 years, your body has kind of regenerated completely, in the sense that all your old cells have died and they're now new cells. And she said, she's like, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's accurate, but I liked that idea. She liked that idea, rather, that she could sort of have shed her old body and with it shed that trauma. So it always kind of stuck with me. And so that's why this poem is called Every 7 Years. The things you never want to see again keep replaying. For me, pink baby mice in the entry of an Albertsons, and the man in front of me. His boot, no second thoughts. His wife looked back at me, and I looked away. I am good at looking away. The town was called Swan Lake, but there were no swans, and there was no lake. We split the barbed wire, then climbed through. Later, I washed my hands in a gas station bathroom. The liquid soap scented a bright artificial grape. Every 7 years, a new body completely. A myth, but a nice one. Nice to imagine. Strangers can be kinder than friends, Like the men who pulled my car out of a ditch. I opened the door to say thank you, but they didn't hear me over the wind and the snow. And the last poem I'll read is called Another Small Failure. In this season of scarcity, compassion also wanes. Silver is nice for a while. The boy on my porch mutters an apology. He doesn't really mean it, and I don't really forgive him. A weather-faded ribbon twirls up a bare branch of the crab apple, and dead leaves knit together in the gap of the sliding doors. In your church, I am an outsider, a visitor who doesn't know the hymns or repetitions, who is not allowed to take the Eucharist, and who shies, as unbroken horses do, from hands on my forehead. Thank you.
Good evening. It is such an honor for us to be playing for you for this event. We chose this music from the repertoire that we play, just really thinking about what is the most beautiful work that we can play, what is the most introspective, thoughtful, and illuminating. And we came up with the heart of each of these three quartets that we chose for you, the slow movements. So you've heard one, and not only after choosing these pieces, we realized they were all written within 3 years of the end of World War II, all in very different circumstances. The first that you heard was Erich Korngold's third quartet. He was exiled from Vienna at the height of his career, and he is better known for his film scores, many with all those great old films with Errol Flynn. And the reason he was writing those was, of course, he was in exile and just continued writing. And what he did was really raise the bar of film music at that time. He inspired so many other film composers to write as he did. And during that time, he used what he made to bring more musicians, fill up the orchestras of the studios in LA, and also said he would not write a serious piece of music as long as Hitler was alive. This is the first work that he wrote after the end of the war. And that middle movement just speaks to us. It's the piece that got us together as a quartet. Also, so this piece that we'll play next, also the second movement, slow movement, from Polish composer Grażyna Basewicz's third quartet. This is her middle quartet of 7 that she wrote. She was Jewish and also exiled from Poland for a while, and came back and wrote this piece that you'll hear, the middle movement. All 3 were award-winning composers in their lifetime, and she went on to write prolifically and was only the second nationally and internationally known woman composer of Poland at the time. After that, we'll play George Walker's string quartet, number 1, written in his youth, right after graduating from the Curtis Institute of Music in 1945. First African-American pianist to graduate from this elite conservatory in Philadelphia. And after that, in the very same year, he was invited to play a recital at New York City's Town Hall, and also soloed with the Philadelphia Orchestra. Many firsts for him. He broke all kinds of boundaries, as did Grażyna Basewicz. All 3 of these composers, were luminous with their musical talents. And in the darkness of their own oppressive circumstances, they made this music, which can inspire more and more light for our path forward.
Thank you to the members of the Clarion Quartet for that beautiful music. Our second and final poet this evening is Kevin Haworth. Kevin is a poet, the author of 5 novels, and a senior lecturer in English at Carnegie Mellon University. He is also a translator of Hebrew poetry. His translations have appeared in World Literature Today and Paris Lit Up, among others. And in particular, he'll share with us tonight his ongoing project translating Iraqi-Israeli poet Eli Eliyahu and contextualizing that work for English-speaking audiences. Please welcome Kevin Haworth.
Toda rabba shebatem. Thank you for coming this evening. As Abby said, I'm going to be reading work by Eli Eliyahu, who's a contemporary Israeli poet. I'm really honored to be representing the voice of translation in this particular place, which is so much about translation. It's really special. My work with Eli is collaborative. Generally, what has happened in the past is I do a draft or two in English, and then I send it to him, and then he comes back with any comments, and then we do a little bit of back and forth until the poem falls into line, so to speak. So I hope that you hear his voice as clearly as mine in this. Eli was born in central Israel. His parents are from Baghdad. They arrived in Israel in the 1950s when life in Iraq became very dangerous for its Jewish residents. This first poem that I'm going to read speaks to his parents' experience to a certain extent. It's called Historia, History. For this house, trees were torn down prematurely. Shrubs were ripped from the ground. Ant hills crumbled. Birds abandoned the nest. a mole fled the warmth of the roiling earth. For this house, villages were emptied of their inhabitants, wells blocked, sheep scattered here and there. For this house, people forgot their mother tongue. Ellie's work is very direct. It tends to be somewhat short, which is nice for the translator. But there's a trickiness to that too, which I hope I've overcome. This is Parable of the Fledgling. I saw a fledgling who fell from the nest to the ground, and his parents call to him from above, and they cannot bring him back, and he cannot bring himself back. And I knew then that there were distances even wings would not travel, and no amount of love would suffice. This one is called Plants. I will tell you about the soul of plants, that delicacy of the stem, how they lengthen in silence, quiet as a whispering in the ear. If a leaf were to be torn from them, there is no suffering like it. A person cannot imagine it at all. They are all relatives, one to another. Their hearts, a trap of honey to plunge into. Their leaves, as thin as thoughts. How precious rain is in their eyes, like gold bars. And the sunlight. This one is called Simple Thing. There is no simple thing. From olive branches, do not make clubs. There is no simple thing at all. From discarded stones, do not build a wall. There is no clarity in ease. Where the house stood, there is a little mound of dust, and from the dust we came, as they say. It is no simple thing to walk in another's shoes, but sometimes it seems that you can truly remember the sheep, the mosque, the well. So one more. This is the last one I'm going to read. I worked on it. I translated it pre-corona, but now for some reason I think of it as the pandemic poem. I don't know. Maybe you'll hear that. It's called Tzomet Drachim, Crossroads. All winter, I didn't write a poem, and I didn't remember even one dream that I dreamt. I left a house and a wife, rented an apartment, and everything I needed I found discarded along one road or another. Bed, table, shelves, refrigerator. It's possible to say that this was a wonder, an act of angels, as I stood at a crossroads. It's also possible not to think about it too much. I cannot know a thing about life's questions or to estimate what I found and how much I lost. But all that winter, I didn't write a poem, and I didn't remember even one dream that I dreamt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That was beautiful. Now to close the evening, we've invited Rabbi Jeffrey Myers of the Tree of Life Congregation to speak, and I learned that he had turned down another commitment to be here with us tonight, so for that we're very thankful.
Thank you, Dr. Friedman. Good evening, everyone. That this concert was held on November 9th is not lost on many of us. because in 1938, state-sanctioned domestic terrorism was unleashed upon the Jews of Germany. On orders from the Gestapo, German police formed cordons around these pogroms to protect only the Aryan citizens of Germany so they would not get injured as they watched approvingly. Fast forward to October 27, 2018, when brave first responders not only cordoned off the streets to keep residents safe, but they ran towards the bullets to rescue Jews, not away from the bullets as the cowardly German police did. And I'm one of those Jews that they rescued. There are still broken windows at the Tree of Life. So to Tatiana, who I see there, please share with Bronwyn, Marta, and Jennifer our appreciation for your sublime performance. I've had the privilege of hearing the Clarion Quartet perform a number of times, and I continue to be impressed by their stirring interpretations and incredible degree of ensemble. Thank you all. Music impacts us in ways that no other experiences do, for it touches our souls. A delicious meal, no matter the expertise of the chef, does not touch our soul. A novel, no matter the skills of the writer, can move us, but does not touch our soul. A work of art, be it a painting or a sculpture, no matter the genius of the artist, does not touch our soul. Music enters our ears and travels electronically to our brains. But after hearing it, the brain has a special pathway reserved for music, and that pathway leads directly to the soul, and it sends it there. That is why music can move us in ways that no other sensory input can. The Talmud, the repository of rabbinic discussion on what the Torah means, has a simple four-word adage that comes to mind. Ein tov el ashir, which I'll translate as, there is no goodness beyond music. In their continuous attempts to degrade the Jews by word and deed, the Nazis called the music that the Clarion Quartet specializes in entarte, meaning degenerate. The more I thought about this label the other day, the more I recognized how wrong the Germans were. For as this once great civilization known as Germany sunk to such inhuman levels, they themselves became entarte. Degenerate acts became normal, and whether it was a Nazi perpetrator or a citizen who turned a blind eye, all were compliant. All had reduced themselves to degenerates. While I get it from a musical historical perspective, I find the label of this music, calling it entarte, insulting to the composers, giving the dead Nazi party a posthumous victory, and I will reject that. This beautiful music demonstrates that despite all the depravities and inhumanities and death, the Jews continued to be the civilized ones amidst the entarte. We were the light amidst the darkness. I want to suggest that we retitle this music while not forgetting its origins. This is music of defiance, of perseverance, and of victory. I humbly offer to you that we call this defiance music. In German, that would be Trotz music. In Hebrew, we would call it Hitnagdut. In Yiddish, I want to take the final three words of the famous song known as Partisan Lied and call this Mir seinen do. We are still here music. This particularly resonates for me. For just as we remember the bravery of the partisans and we remember Kristallnacht, and as we remember the 11 victims of anti-Semitism on this Kristallnacht evening, we are still here. Wir seien da. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick thank you, Rabbi Myers, and his granddaughter of a partisan, paratrooper partisan. I found that very moving. And thank you to all of you for coming tonight and being here. And thank you to City of Asylum for collaborating and hosting the event. And to the Clarion Quartet for their really enlightening and beautiful music. And to Natalie Homer and Kevin Haworth for their beautiful poetry and poetry and translation. I'm going to hand over the mic to Abby, and
I have nothing else to say. Just good night and thank you, and that concludes our program. Thank you for being here. Thank you for this beautiful music and words.